The year is 1260, a date that would etch itself into the annals of history, not for a conquest by the seemingly invincible Mongol Empire, but for its first definitive and utterly crushing defeat in open battle. For nearly half a century, the Mongol war machine had swept across Asia and Eastern Europe, sowing terror and destruction, its name synonymous with unparalleled military might and an insatiable desire for conquest. From the steppes of Mongolia, they had carved out the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Korea to Ukraine, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. Cities burned, empires crumbled, and countless lives were extinguished under the thundering hooves of their cavalry. Yet, on September 3, 1260, in a valley known as Ain Jalut, the Spring of Goliath, in what is now northern Israel, this unstoppable force would finally meet its match. This was not merely another engagement, it was a watershed moment, a turning point that forever reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the medieval world. Without Ain Jalut, the cultural, religious, and political future of the Middle East, North Africa, and potentially even Europe would have been drastically, perhaps unrecognizably different. To understand the immense significance of Ain Jalut, we must first grasp the terrifying scale of Mongol expansion leading up to that fateful day. Genghis Khan, universal ruler, united the disparate nomadic tribes of Mongolia in 1206, forging them into an overwhelmingly effective fighting force. His successors, particularly Ogedei Khan and Möngke Khan, continued his legacy with relentless ambition. By the 1240s, the Mongols had sacked Baghdad, destroyed Khwarazm, subjugated Kievan Rusas, and stood poised at the gates of Central Europe. Their military doctrine was brutally efficient: speed, surprise, overwhelming numbers, and psychological warfare. They were masters of curved bows, expert horsemen, and innovators in siege warfare, adapting Chinese and Persian technologies. The sheer brutality of their campaigns, often involving the systematic slaughter of populations, was designed to instill such fear that future adversaries would surrender without a fight. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench were reduced to rubble. The Kipchak Khanate in the Eurasian steppes was annihilated. Hungary and Poland had been savaged in 1241 to 1242, with the Battle of Legnica serving as a stark reminder of their military superiority against European knightly armies. Now, by the mid-13th century, the focus had shifted westward. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, was tasked by his brother, Möngke Khan, in 1253 with the explicit mission to crush the last remaining independent Muslim states in southwestern Asia. His army, estimated to be around 130,000 men with substantial contingents of allied forces, was a formidable expeditionary force, reportedly the largest ever assembled since the original Mongol invasions. Hulagu began his campaign in 1256, systematically dismantling the centers of Islamic power and culture. First to fall was the Nizari Ismaili state, the Assassins, whose mountain strongholds, including Alamut, were painstakingly conquered. This was followed by the catastrophic siege of Baghdad in 1258. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled for over 500 years and was the spiritual and intellectual heart of Sunni Islam, was utterly destroyed. The city, a beacon of learning and civilization, was sacked with unimaginable ferocity. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of people were massacred, and its vast libraries, containing centuries of accumulated knowledge, were either burned or thrown into the Tigris River, staining its waters black with ink. The fall of Baghdad sent shockwaves across the Islamic world and beyond, signaling the end of an era. The Mongols were perceived as an unstoppable force, an apocalyptic judgment from God. After Baghdad, Hulagu turned his attention to Syria, then ruled by the Ayyubid dynasty. Aleppo fell in January 1260, subjected to a brutal 6-day sack. Damascus, seeing the fate of its sister cities, surrendered without a fight in March 1260, a move facilitated by the foresight of its governor. With Syria under Mongol dominion, their cavalry outriders pushed even further south, conducting devastating raids into Palestine, reaching as far as Bethlehem and Gaza. A Mongol garrison of around 10,000 men was established in Syria under the command of Kitbuka Noyan, a Naiman Christian general and Hulagu's most trusted lieutenant. Kitbuka was an able commander, utterly loyal, and deeply committed to Hulagu's vision of expanding the Mongol Empire to its ultimate limits. His presence in Syria represented the direct challenge to the remaining Islamic power, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The Mamluks themselves were a unique and powerful military force. Their state was founded in Egypt in 1250, just a decade before Ain Jalut, by former slave soldiers, mamluks, who had overthrown their Ayyubid masters. These mamluks were primarily Kipchak Turks and Circassians, bought as boys, rigorously trained in martial arts, equestrianism, and Islamic learning. They rose through the ranks based purely on merit, forming an elite cavalry corps fiercely loyal to their masters and ultimately to their own institution. Their society was structured around military prowess. Their very existence was defined by their ability to wage war. The Mamluk sultans, like Aybak and Qutuz, were themselves Mamluks who had achieved supreme power through fierce competitio and demonstrated effectiveness in battle. This military meritocracy produced an army that was disciplined, highly motivated, and expertly trained in the same martial traditions as the Mongols themselves, horse archery and skilled cavalry maneuvers. By 1260, the Mamluk Sultan in Egypt was Saif ad-Din Qutuz. Qutuz was a man of extraordinary resolve and piety, having himself been captured and sold into slavery after the Mongol invasion of his homeland in Khwarezm. He harbored a deep, personal hatred for the Mongols and understood the existential threat they posed. He had seized power in 1259 amid internal strife, deposing the young Sultan al-Mansur Ali. His legitimacy was often questioned, but in the face of the Mongol menace, his decisiveness and leadership proved indispensable. Qutuz consolidated his authority by executing political opponents and preparing Egypt for the inevitable confrontation. He knew that if the Mongols conquered Egypt, there would be nowhere left for Islam to retreat to. The direct invitation for conflict came in early 1260. Hulagu Khan, having secured Syria, sent an embassy to Cairo with an ultimatum to Qutuz. The Mongol envoys presented a letter that contained a stark choice: surrender and submit to Mongol rule, or face total annihilation. The letter, typical of Mongol psychological warfare, was laced with dire threats, recounting the destruction of Baghdad and other cities, leaving no doubt about the Mongols' intent. It ended with the ominous warning: save yourselves by swiftly accepting our rule before the calamity befalls you. Qutuz's response was unprecedented and audacious. In a powerful display of defiance, he opted for war. He had the Mongol envoys executed, their heads impaled on the Bab Zuwayla Gate of Cairo. This was a clear signal to both his own people and the Mongols. Egypt would not surrender. It would fight. This act also ignited a fierce debate among Mamluk commanders. Some advocated for a defensive strategy, fortifying Cairo and awaiting the Mongol assault. Others, including Qutuz and his formidable general, Baybars al-Bundukdari, argued for a preemptive strike. They understood that allowing the Mongols to consolidate their gains in Syria and then advance through the Sinai Desert would be disastrous. Baybars, a charismatic and ruthless Mamluk commander of Kipchak origin, was a veteran of many battles, including the Seventh Crusade against Louis IX of France. He had a brilliant tactical mind and was considered one of the era's finest generals. Although Baybars had been briefly exiled by Qutuz due to political maneuvering, the common existential threat forced a reconciliation. Baybars was recalled and played a crucial role in advocating an offensive strategy. He also argued forcefully to allow the Mamluk army to move towards Acre, then a Crusader stronghold, to secure provisions and, crucially, to form a temporary truce or at least a passage agreement with the Frankish Crusaders. The decision to march out and meet the Mongols in Syria was a bold gamble. It was made possible, ironically, by a sudden shift in Mongol dynastic politics. In August 1259, Möngke Khan, the Great Khan, died during a campaign in China. This news prompted Hulagu Khan to withdraw the vast majority of his army from Syria, including his personal guard and elite contingents, to return to Mongolia to participate in the Kurultai, the assembly that would elect Möngke's successor. This left Kitbuka Noyan in command of a significantly reduced force in Syria, estimated to be around 10,000 to 20,000 men. While still a formidable number, this was a fraction of Hulagu's original invasion force. This temporary weakness in the Mongol deployment was a window of opportunity that Qutuz and Baibars were determined to exploit. In July 1260, the Mamluk army, numbering perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 highly trained cavalry, marched north from Cairo into Palestine. Their march was audacious. They bypassed the standard desert routes and approached the coast, making a calculated move to secure a temporary détente with the Frankish Crusaders of Acre. The Crusaders, despite their deep distrust of the Mamluks, also feared the Mongols, who had attacked their territories and slaughtered many Christians in cities like Sidon. Facing two formidable enemies, the Crusaders of Acre chose neutrality, providing the Mamluks with supplies and allowing them to pass through their territory unmolested. This decision, though controversial for the Crusaders, was strategically vital for the Mamluks, securing their flank and logistical support. The Mamluk army, after resting and resupplying near Acre, then moved inland. On September 3, 1260, they encountered Kitbuka's Mongol army in the Jezreel Valley, near a watering hole called Ain Jalut. The Mamluks employed a classic yet risky tactic. Baibars led the vanguard, comprised of a smaller, agile force designed to draw Kitbuka's main force into the valley. As Baibars engaged the Mongols, Qutuz concealed the bulk of the Mamluk army among the hills and ravines. The terrain of Ain Jalut was crucial. Unlike the open steppes where Mongol cavalry excelled, the valley offered some topographic features that could be exploited for ambushes and diversions. The battle commenced with Baibars' light cavalry engaging the Mongol vanguard. The initial skirmishes saw the Mamluks execute feigned retreats, a tactic the Mongols themselves had perfected, drawing Kitbuka's forces deeper into the trap. Kitbuka, confident in Mongol superiority and perhaps underestimating the Mamluks, pressed his attack aggressively. The Mongols, in their usual formation, likely deployed their cavalry in crescent-shaped formations, attempting to encircle the Mamluk vanguard. However, as the momentum of the battle swung, the Mamluks found themselves temporarily overwhelmed by the Mongol charge. The Mamluk left flank was reportedly broken, and some accounts suggest Baibars' forces were pushed back, almost to the point of breaking. At this critical juncture, Qutuz made his decisive move. Emerging from the hidden positions in the hills, he personally led the Mamluk main body into the fray, his distinctive helmet and battle cry rallying his faltering troops. He reportedly threw his helmet to the ground, shouting, "O Muslims! O Muslims!" This act of personal courage and leadership reinvigorated the Mamluk ranks, demonstrating that their sultan was in the thick of the fight with them. The arrival of fresh, disciplined Mamluk cavalry, particularly their heavy armored contingents, turned the tide. The Mongols, caught between Baibars' re-engaged forces and Qutuz's main army, now found themselves encircled in a similar manner to how they themselves had trapped countless enemies before. What followed was a brutal extended melee. The Mamluks, fighting for their very survival and fueled by a desire for vengeance for the destruction wrought by the Mongols, fought with extraordinary ferocity. Their heavy cavalry, wielding lances, swords, and maces, engaged the Mongol horse archers and lancers at close quarters. The Mamluks were also expert horse archers themselves, but their close-quarter combat skills, combined with their discipline and heavier armor, gave them an advantage in sustained, direct engagement. Kitbuka fought valiantly, leading his men from the front, but his force, significantly outnumbered and now tactical outmaneuvered, was slowly but surely being ground down. The Mamluks systematically tightened their encirclement. Mongol losses mounted rapidly. Eventually, Kitbuka's horse was killed, and he was captured. When brought before Qutuz, he reportedly maintained his defiance, stating that while he might die, Hulagu Khan was still alive and would lead a much larger army to avenge him. Qutuz, however, showed no mercy, ordering Kitbuka's immediate execution. With the death of their commander, the remaining Mongol forces were routed, scattering in disarray. Many were hunted down and killed in the ensuing pursuit. The Battle of Ain Jalut was an absolute, unequivocal victory for the Mamluks. It was a complete and utter defeat for the Mongols, something that had not happened in over 50 years to any significant Mongol force. The psychological impact was immense. The myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered. For the first time, a non-Mongol army had not only stood its ground, but had decisively defeated a Mongol force in open battle, decimating its numbers and killing its commander. The immediate aftermath of the battle saw Qutuz and Baybars continue their pursuit of the fleeing Mongols, liberating Damascus and other Syrian cities. The Mamluk reconquest of Syria was swift. The surviving Mongol garrisons were either overwhelmed or fled. The Mamluk Sultanate now extended its dominion over Bilad al-Sham, establishing its rule as the dominant power in the region. The long-term consequences of Ain Jalut were profound and far-reaching. Firstly, it established TThe Mamluk Sultanate as the protector of Islam and the dominant power in the Middle East for the next 250 years. Egypt became the new intellectual and spiritual center of the Islamic world, attracting scholars and artisans fleeing Mongol devastation elsewhere. The Mamluks maintained a fierce anti-Mongol stance, engaging in numerous subsequent skirmishes and battles, ultimately preventing any lasting Mongol re-establishment in Syria. Secondly, Ain Jalut marked the definitive western limit of Mongol expansion. While the Ilkhanate, Hulagu's branch of the Mongol Empire, would attempt to invade Syria several more times in the coming decades, notably in 1281 at the Second Battle of Homs, and in 1299 to 1300 at the Battle of Wadi al-Khaznadar, they were never able to achieve a lasting victory or secure permanent control over Egypt and Syria. The Mamluk frontier held firm. Thirdly, it directly contributed to the internal fragmentation of the Mongol Empire. The death of Manka Khan and the subsequent succession struggle led to the Toluid Civil War, 1260 to 1264, between Kublai Khan and Arik Bokeh. This conflict, combined with deep-seated rivalries between the various Mongol uluses, sub-khanates, particularly between Hulagu's Ilkhanate and the Golden Horde, who ruled the steppes north of the Caucasus, prevented any unified, overwhelming Mongol effort against the Mamluks. Berk Khan of the Golden Horde, a convert to Islam, even formed an alliance with the Mamluks against his cousin Hulagu, seeing the Ilkhanate's expansion into Muslim lands as a betrayal. This internal strife significantly weakened the Mongol threat. Fourthly, Ain Jalut essentially saved the intellectual and cultural heritage of Islam. With Baghdad destroyed, Egypt and its Mamluk rulers became the custodians of much of Islamic scholarship and learning. Al-Azhar University in Cairo, among other institutions, flourished, ensuring the continuity of Islamic civilization. Had Egypt fallen, it's conceivable that much of this heritage could have been lost. Finally, while often overlooked in European histories, Ain Jalut indirectly protected Europe from further large-scale Mongol invasions. While the Golden Horde maintained a formidable presence in Eastern Europe for centuries, the Ilkhanate, which was the direct successor to Hulagu's forces, was decisively checked at its southwestern frontier. Had they conquered Egypt and North Africa, their resources and staging grounds for further western expansion would have been vastly increased. The Battle of Ain Jalut stands as a testament to strategic leadership, tactical brilliance, and the sheer audacity of an army fighting with its back against the wall. Qutuz, despite his brief reign, he was assassinated by Baybars and other Mamluk emirs shortly after Ain Jalut. A stark reminder of Mamluk political ruthlessness, is rightly celebrated as a hero in Islamic history. Baybars, who then ascended to the Sultanate, cemented the Mamluk state's power, building up its defenses and consolidating its hold over Syria. His reign would see the final expulsion of the Crusaders from the Levant, culminating in the fall of Acre in 1291. The legacy of Ain Jalut resonates through history. It proved that discipline, courage, tactical ingenuity, and a well-trained, highly motivated army could overcome the seemingly insurmountable power of the Mongol Empire. It was a battle fought against the backdrop of an apocalyptic threat, a moment when the destiny of the Middle East, and perhaps beyond, hung in the balance. It was the spring of Goliath, where a new David emerged to slay the seemingly unstoppable giant, forever altering the course of human history. The thundering hooves of the Mongol juggernaut were finally halted, marking September 3, 1260, as the day the world changed. The fear had dissipated, the tide had turned. The Mongols, once thought invincible, now carried the indelible stain of a crushing defeat. Ain Jalut wasn't just a battle, it was a revolution in the medieval world. Order. The Mamluks would continue to face challenges, both internal and external, but their decisive victory at Ain Jalut secured their place as the undisputed protectors of the Dar al-Islam. This single battle fundamentally altered the geopolitical dynamics, allowing for the reflourishing of Islamic culture and science, previously devastated by the Mongol onslaught. It provided a crucial breathing space that allowed the subsequent recovery and resurgence of Islamic civilization, ensuring its continuity for centuries to come. The names of Qutuz and Baybars became legendary, not just as military leaders but as saviors, delivering the nascent Mamluk state and the wider Islamic world from an existential threat. The echoes of that desperate struggle in the Jezreel Valley reverberate to this day, a timeless reminder of human resilience against overwhelming odds. The aftermath also highlighted the brutal nature of Mamluk succession, as Baybar's assassination of Qutuz underscored the constant struggle for power within the meritocratic Mamluk system. Yet, it also proved that the Mamluk institution, not just an individual ruler, was strong enough to withstand such internal turmoil and continue its vital role. Baybar's subsequent reign was marked by military successes against both the Crusaders and the Ilkhanate, solidifying the gains of Ain Jalut and establishing the Mamluk Sultanate as the preeminent power in the region. The Mamluks, born from the ashes of former empires and forged in the crucible of battle, had not only stopped the Mongol tide, but had become a formidable empire in their own right, safeguarding the southern flank of the Islamic world and shaping the course of history for centuries to come. The reverberations of that dusty day in September 1260 truly changed the world.